Hi, this is Tim with RCNoob.com. We're going to take a closer look at the chassis of the Redcat Racing Everest Gen 7 Sport. I've had this out for a drive outside. I've had it on a couple indoor runs over some foam blocks. Really like how this vehicle handles. We're going to get into my one thing that could be updated or massaged or modified or however you want to call it. We'll get to that shortly. Teaser, I'm kind of hovering over that area right now. But we're going to take a closer look at just what it looks like under the body and how it compares to other rigs on the market, specifically the Axial Scx10. Now the Scx10 Classic is what I have on hand to kind of compare it with. Now while my Scx10 is not really bone stock, it is, for all intents and purposes, set up the same way that you would have gotten it out of the box. So I feel that that's a fair comparison. I was a little bit shocked at how open this chassis is and how it doesn't feel very claustrophobic. And now that I look at this model compared to the Scx10, which I have off camera over here, I feel that the body or the battery placement is one of the main factors for this. On the Scx10 Classic, it was mounted in the back, and you have that big block sitting right here, and it takes up a lot of space, and it really makes the chassis feel a lot more just complete or packed full of stuff. On this model, you have the battery mounted perpendicular to the chassis, where I do feel that not having it be parallel to the chassis frame or the chassis rails is a bit of a visual trick. It makes it appear a little more clean and maybe a little more Spartan compared to something like the Scx10. One area of concern that some folks had in seeing initial pictures of this rig has been like the height of the diff pumpkin, and there was some concern that that hangs down too low, it's going to hit and it's going to hang you up on things. I haven't encountered any issues with this yet, and just by eyeballing it, it appears to be the same height or hang down as low as the Scx10 Classic. So I don't think that this is going to cause many or any issues. Again, I'm focusing on the front. This is the area that I'm the most, I don't want to say concerned, but I think there's room for improvement, and others feel the same way. On further inspection, you'll see there's a little bit of a nub. There's a little additional piece of plastic here on the steering knuckle. Why that's there, I'm not quite sure. But as you turn, that comes in contact with this screw on the C-hub, and that really prevents it from turning, even though it's a small amount, it's preventing it from turning a little bit and getting a few more degrees or a degree or two of turning. Now, another area of potential upgrade or enhancement that this model could have would be using a bent steering link, and having the bend here, have it come out a little bit more, again, to give it more, just more movement. Eliminating this and adding a bent steering link would give it a lot more movement, I believe. And others do too, because they've been making modifications. Now I'm going to bring in the Scx10, and full disclosure, I have modified or made some enhancements to the steering on that model. However, I don't feel that I've gone too far outside of what the original steering setup is on that model. So I think we're comparing stock apples to stock apples for the most part. Okay, here's my Scx10 Classic, and as you can see on the steering knuckles, I don't have that additional bit of plastic. Axial didn't put that on there, and I do have a bent steering link. Now this is an aftermarket part, it's a GPM racing piece. However, it does for the most part follow the same shape and curvature of the stock plastic bit. So I don't think that you're, again, comparing apples to oranges here. I think you're fairly close. So if I give this a bit of a turn, you see that's a fair amount of steering angle. And now I believe the Scx10 too has even greater steering angle just because of how that steering geometry has been set up. Turn it back the other way. I've actually got a little more room over on between the knuckle and that screw. That's a nice amount of steer. Okay, so I've got both rigs flipped over, both rigs turned maximum amount in the same direction, and although it's minimal, it does make a big difference. I don't find steering the Scx10 to be as much of a chore as this rig, especially in tight corners. You know, if you're out bombing around in a field, it's no big deal. You know, you turn, you can make wide sweeping turns, you can make tight turns, whatever. This machine, where I ran it outdoors, I found myself having to make some, you know, Y turns and Z turns and every other kind of letter alphabet turn you could think of, because I just didn't have the turning radius and the tightness that I needed in this stock configuration. So what I think we're going to do is we're going to make some modifications to the steering knuckles on the Everest Gen 7, and that's, wow, that's even more obvious. I've got the Everest turned as far over as it'll go, and I have the Scx10 turned, and you can definitely see there's a lot more angle on the Scx10 versus the Everest Gen 7. So, as I was saying, what I think I'm going to do is either modify the steering linkage by getting different bent link ends, or I'm going to get the same type of steering bar that I have on the Scx10. Additionally, I'm going to shave off this little bit here because I don't really feel that that does anything. I may actually see if I can swap out Scx10 steering knuckles onto this model. We'll see how that goes. I'll do a little bit of research before I start spending money. Easiest way is going to be just to cut this off, or grind it off, or shave it off, or cut it off, whatever. But I do feel that after doing that, you're going to gain a few, like a degree or two of steering, and that should really help you out in the long run. But again, combining it with a bent steering link is going to go even further. Since I've got both of these rigs flipped over, we'll just zoom out and take a peek at them with the bodies off. So with both of these machines flipped over onto their invisible lids, you know, again, the Everest Gen 7 looks very minimalistic, looks very Spartan. Now, again, I didn't realize this until I was playing around with it for a bit. You don't have rock sliders on this model. You don't have rock sliders on this model. Everything else, for the most part, pairs up. Now, Redcat has mounted their electronics in a different spot. So right here, they're alongside the motor. Over on the Scx10, they mounted their electronics up toward the front. Now, of course, you can move things around, and I have modified mine and moved my electronic bits and pieces around a little bit. But again, I've, for the most part, kept things fairly stock. Looking at this, there's a kind of an X pattern for the steering linkage on the Scx10 versus more of a parallel or H pattern for the Everest Gen 7. I think that lends itself to some of the cleanness, or the, you know, that wide open feeling that you get from this model versus this one. Performance-wise, I think they both handle, you know, about the same. I was very impressed with these tires, very impressed with the motor. It had a lot of torque, it had a lot of zip, and really a lot of pep. Where I was driving this outdoors, if you've seen that video, you know, there weren't many really extreme terrain choices to choose from. So, you know, I kind of drove it around on some grass, drove it around on pavement, drove it around a little bit of an embankment, and it handled perfectly. And I drove it around in some leaves, and it got caught up a little bit, but it wasn't bad. Really impressed with how this machine handles. I've always been impressed with how the Scx10 handles, so I think we're going to get this out of the way. Our demonstration purposes for tonight are done with. Now, before I go, I do want to give props to Redcat for something that they've started rolling out on Thingiverse, which is a 3D printing repository, or 3D printing file library. They have started to release bits and pieces for this model. Now, you know, the only thing differentiating, for the most part, differentiating the sport model from the pro model has been just some, you know, accessories and body components. Well, Redcat Racing has started to release the you know, fenders and, you know, inner fenders and a fender connector, and they've released a different bumper mount system where you can then run a bumper from an Scx10 on this model, front and back. They have, you know, just really kind of caught me off guard by releasing these things, releasing them for free. Now, the only catch is you have to have a 3D printer or access to a 3D printer in order to create these things for yourself. but you can then go ahead and modify them, do what you want. They've released door handles for the body. They've released a just a fun little license plate frame for the body. They've released a different mounting bracket so you can mount the rear tire on the Sport to the back of the body, which is pretty cool. Just neat to see a company do that, you know, and I have to feel that they're potentially cutting into some of their profit. However, they're taking a gamble on, you know, whether or not people that bought this model have 3D printers. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have a 3D printer, and as I finish my print right now that I've got going on my machine, I'm going to start printing out some of these parts and pieces and just see what we can do with this stock machine, and for the low price of some printer filament and a few maybe hours of printing, you know, see how we can modify this machine and still keep it, you know, a budget-friendly rig. So really happy with how this machine's handling. I'm excited to see what it does after we make some of these steering adjustments. I'm just really happy. It handles great. Loving the tires, loving the pep from the motor. Hoping that weather will be decent enough for me to drive it this upcoming weekend. And I'm also hoping to do some comparisons with a bone stock Scx10 deadbolt. That will be a true apples to apples comparison. And then you'll see all the plastic bits on that machine versus all the aluminum bits on this machine and the steel bits. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully, fingers crossed, everything works out and I'm able to do that. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you for checking out the channel. If you are new to the RC Noob YouTube channel, if you have not yet subscribed, please go ahead and do that. Again, greatly appreciated. Until next time, this is Tim for RC Noob. Keep your batteries charged up, keep your nitro topped off, and keep enjoying the RC hobby.